The night train from Budapest hissed into Cluj like a tired dragon, its iron flanks gleaming in the rain. Dr. Eleanor Harrow, senior lecturer in medieval studies at Oxford and recent recipient of a coveted sabbatical grant, stepped onto the slick platform with 2 suitcases, a stack of notebooks, and a heart that beat a little faster than usual. Transylvania had haunted her academic imagination for years, an intersection of Latin, Slavic, and German streams, where the Middle Ages never quite ceded to the modern world. She intended to spend 9 quiet months here, cataloguing local chronicles and church registers for a monograph on monastic book culture. The university in Cluj had booked her a guest room, but a colleague suggested something better. "Stay in Visgri," he said, naming a Saxon village folded into the forested hills south of the city. "The Petrescu family keeps an old farmhouse, the kind with thick stone walls and a hearth big enough to roast a hog. It will be cold but authentic, and Anna Petrescu's cooking alone is worth the detour." 2 days later, Eleanor found herself bumping along a muddy lane, the rental car's headlights carving tunnels through fog. Anna, a stout woman with plaited grey hair, ushered her inside, fed her mushroom stew and sour cherry brandy, then showed her to an upstairs room scented with lavender sachets. On the 3rd evening, once formalities had relaxed into familiarity, Anna retrieved a cloth-wrapped bundle from a cedar chest. "For a professor of old things," she said, smiling shyly. Inside lay a hand-sewn notebook, its parchment pages darkened by centuries of smoke. The text meandered in a crabbed script, part High German, part Latin glosses, part Old Romanian. Between lines of brown ink, faint red annotations flickered like embers. "It belonged to my great-grandmother's great-grandmother," Anna explained. "Everyone calls it a cookbook, though half the recipes sound inedible. My mother said the monks in the hills once copied prayers into their soup instructions, but who can tell? Maybe you read it." Eleanor's pulse quickened. The prospect of unstudied vernacular manuscripts was catnip to any medievalist. She thanked Anna, promised to treat the volume gently, and retreated to the kitchen table. Over the next week, storms pinned her indoors. Thunder rattled shutters while she transcribed by the hearth, sipping too much coffee and scribbling marginal notes. The cookbook began innocently. Almond milk for Lent, trout stuffed with sorrel and juniper, black bread with hemp, yet the recipes obeyed no seasonal order and measurements were odd. One ragat called for 11 grains of salt beneath the waning moon and 7 turns of the spoon sunwise. In other places, a line of verse intruded. "Salt thrice cast where shadows meet, 6 steps left and fire retreats." It felt less like gastronomy than ritual. Late one night, she set her pencil down and gazed at a page whose margins bore tiny red crosses. The text read, "Take 3 peppercorns, 1 clove, 4 sprigs thyme. Grind sunwise, then widdershins. Heat 46 heartbeats. 3 January 4th, 46. Her sleepy brain jolted awake. Those numbers echoed coordinates she had seen in a 17th century Jesuit map of the region, latitude 46.L, longitude 24.LL. That point lay near the ruins of Mamagure Monastery, abandoned since Habsburg suppressions. Coincidence? Perhaps. Yet in the margin, someone had inked a tiny drawing of a basilica on a hill. Eleanor fetched the map from her suitcase, unfurled it on the floor and aligned ruler and compass. The peppercorn clove recipe intersected the monastery. She flipped the parchment. Another menu, broth of nettle and chicory, listed 5, 13, 2, and 8. She plodded again. A spot in the same valley but slightly east, at the base of a limestone cliff known locally as Esfentiosea, the Holy Door. A prickle ran up her spine. The cookbook was including locations. But to what end? The next day she drove into Cluj's archives, requested microfilms of monastic property deeds, and pieced together a timeline. Under Turkish pressure in the 15th century, Benedictine scribes had tunneled beneath their churches to protect relics and libraries. Some passages collapsed after earthquakes, others were sealed by later regimes. None, as far as she knew, had been rediscovered. Back in Viskri, she consulted Anna, who shrugged. Old tales say there's a tunnel from the monastery to the riverbank, but boys searched years ago and found only bats. Anna's nephew, however, might guide her. Stefan, a forestry student home for Easter. Stefan arrived on a battered motorcycle, wearing a canvas jacket and curiosity. He listened as Eleanor outlined her theory. Instead of scoffing, he grinned. "I hunted mushrooms near Mebagura last spring. There's a stone arch half buried in moss. I can take you." They packed lanterns, rope, and a thermos of plum tea, then left at dawn along rutted roads. Mist clung to fir branches, ravens croaked overhead. By mid-morning, they reached the monastery plateau, a scatter of broken cloisters and a roofless nave inhabited by nettles. At the western transept, an iron gate blocked a stairway descending into dark. Stones above the lintel bore a chiseled chalice, mirroring a doodle Eleanor had seen beneath the cookbook's recipe for fasting wine. The gate was padlocked, but ancient. Stefan produced a hammer, but Eleanor stayed his hand. "Wait, the vinegar," she muttered, recalling an instruction under a pickle entry. "Bathe iron in sour wine, count to 90, and the stubborn yield." She poured tea heavy with lemon over the rust. 90 heartbeats later, the lock crumbled after a single tap. Stefan raised an eyebrow. They stepped into chill air smelling of earth and candle wax long extinguished. The tunnel sloped gently, its walls carved with graffiti crosses, wolves, crescents. Every 10 paces a niche held the stub of a torch. After perhaps 50 meters, the passage forked on the wall. Faded red streaks formed a scrawl, quite like handwriting. "When the broth begins to boil, stir east, then south to cool." East, then south. Eleanor consulted a compass and chose the right-hand tunnel, which curved accordingly. Deeper they went. Bats flitted, tiny gusts brushed their cheeks. In one chamber, a fresco showed a monk ladling soup into bowls held by villagers. Overlaid on the fresco, a later hand had etched a grid, small numbers at each corner. For 50 years, Eleanor had trained her eye to see palimpsests. Now the skill felt like second sight. "These are recipe numbers," she whispered. They reached a circular space where the ceiling opened into a chimney of daylight. Beneath lay an oak door banded in iron. No handle, only a tiny hole the width of a finger. The cookbook had described the dough key. Insert the risen loaf, twist thrice, and let rest. Eleanor rummaged in her satchel. Before leaving the farmhouse, she had wrapped a lump of raw bread dough in waxed cloth, on the hunch that symbolism once had practical consequences. She rolled it into a cylinder, pushed it into the hole, and turned. Soft dough deformed, pressing against internal ridges. Something clicked, and the door swung inward with a sigh of stale air. Beyond, shelves marched into gloom. Rows and rows of wooden boards stacked with parchment codices bound in leather, their spines inked with titles. A subterranean library, untouched for centuries. Eleanor's lantern quivered in her grasp. Some volumes bore classical texts, others carried Cyrillic psalters, Hebrew commentaries, even Arabic treatises. The monks of Melgora had saved the canon of 2 civilizations and buried it under recipe riddles. Stefan exhaled a low whistle. "My aunt will bake you a cake when she hears of this." Yet jubilation lasted only moments, for another lantern flared behind them. A tall man in a charcoal coat stepped through the oak door, flanked by 2 rough shapes. His face was sharp, his eyes amused. "Professor Harrow," he said in accented English. "I thought the clues would lure someone clever, but you exceeded expectation." Eleanor recognized him from a reception in Cluj, Constantin Ardelien, a private collector known for expensive wine and whispered scandals of trafficking antiquities. She'd rejected his offer of funding. Apparently he had followed her. "I'll take those manuscripts now," he said. His companions, local men with spades, edged forward. Eleanor's mind raced. She could not overpower them, but perhaps the cookbook still held secrets. She recalled a dessert titled Nun's Whispers, ending with the line, "Burn the sugar, choke the night, and morning shall inherit." Burn the sugar. The recipe specified saltpeter and honey ingredients for medieval smoke bombs used by Byzantine engineers. She had dismissed it as culinary fantasy. The chamber's floor was strewn with dust and dry parchment fragments. She knelt, fingers fast, shaping a mound of brittle paper around her metal flashlight, then poured from her thermos the sweet tea again, rich in sugar. From her pocket, she withdrew a film canister of magnesium powder kept for photographing manuscripts under raking light. Mixed with the sugared tea, magnesium would spark brilliantly. Ardeline frowned. "What are you—" Eleanor struck her lighter and touched flame to the paper. A flash like bottled lightning filled the room, followed by choking white smoke. Bats erupted from crevices in a screeching cyclone. Stefan seized Eleanor's arm. They ducked behind a bookshelf while Ardelian coughed and swore. In the chaos, one thug swung his spade blindly, cracking a shelf. Dust poured down. "Follow me," Stefan hissed, hauling her toward a narrow corridor lined with amphorae. They barreled along, the scholar clutching her notebook, the student dragging rope. Behind, boots pounded and voices echoed. The corridor ended at a stone slab etched with the outline of a fish. Another cookbook stanza flashed in Eleanor's memory. "Under scales of stone, the river runs. Pour crimson, follow upstream." Crimson could only mean wine. Stefan unslung his water bottle, half filled with a cheap Merlot from last night's dinner, and doused the slab. Wine seeped into hairline cracks, revealing a carved Kiar symbol. When Eleanor pressed the Greek letters, the slab slid aside, revealing a chute. No steps, only packed dirt. They exchanged a nod and slithered through. The passage dropped steeply, spitting them into a cavern where an underground rivulet murmured. Faint light shimmered ahead. An exit? They slogged knee-deep through icy flow until the tunnel widened into daylight fringed by willow roots. They emerged on a riverbank 1/2 kilometer from the monastery, soaked and shivering but alive. Stefan laughed in disbelief. Eleanor looked back at the willow screen. Sunlight now gleamed off the fish-carved slab sliding shut. Unless one knew the trick with wine, it would appear a natural bank. "Ardeline?" Stefan asked. "If he's sensible, he'll retreat the way he came. The library's intricate, smoke will linger. He won't risk lighting a match near those 15th-century pigments." She pushed wet hair from her forehead. "We must alert the cultural ministry at once." They trudged toward the village road, where cell reception flickered. By evening, police and archaeologists surrounded Mebagura. Ardelian was discovered in the upper tunnel, red-eyed and furious, handcuffed amid a pile of looted reliquaries. The press descended, broadcasting dramatic headlines about an English professor, subterranean codices, and a smuggler foiled by medieval gastronomy. Weeks passed in a blur of conservation labs. Specialists unwrapped manuscripts, recording water damage and mold. Many codices were pristine, thanks to the cool, constant temperature. Scholars identified a lost Cicero commentary, a unique Ruthenian herbal, and what appeared to be the only surviving copy of Miraculous Sancti Nicolae, translated into Old Romanian. Amid diplomatic celebrations, Eleanor remembered the Petrescu farmhouse. She returned one crisp morning of budding chestnut leaves. Anna met her at the gate, apron flower-dusted. Eleanor explained everything. The coordinates, the tunnels, the rescue of the library. Anna listened, eyes wide. "So that little book led you," she marveled, touching the parchment volume, now sealed in a mylar box. "My grandmother used to balance it on the sill to keep beetles away." "It led us all," Eleanor said. Though we still don't know who penned the code. Over walnut cake, she and Stefan, now an enthusiastic co-researcher, examined the cookbook anew. On the final page, invisible until viewed under ultraviolet light, appeared 4 lines of minuscule Latin. In or non epule sed signa, in mensa non sibus sed via, serva lector quem amas sibus mutatur in lumen. Eleanor translated aloud. In the mouth, not food but signs. On the table, not a meal but a path. Preserve, reader, what you love. Provision turns into light. It was the monks' wink across time, assuring that their feasts of words would survive barbarians, empires, and even scholars. Summer ripened. Conservationists invited Eleanor to curate an exhibition in Cluj, Recipes of Refuge, the Malaga texts. She insisted Stefan receive co-credit and that Anna's family be honored donors. The opening night drew ambassadors, villagers, and culinary historians sniffing gossip about medieval smoke bombs and vinegar locks. In a glass case stood the humble cookbook, open to the peppercorn clove page. Next to it, amplified by high-resolution screens, glowed the tunnel coordinates. Eleanor spoke briefly. She described monks who encoded geography in gastronomy, families who preserved relics as kitchen heirlooms, and the odd justice of finding a lost library with the aid of garlic, thyme, and dough. But the story did not end with scholarship. In Viskrai, Anna revived several edible recipes, again removing numerological traplines. Tourists arrived on bicycles for her monk's lentil stew, unaware they were consuming an oxymoron of secrecy and nourishment. Profits funded restoration of the ruined cloister. Each bowl carried a discreet label. Coordinates available upon request. Eleanor's sabbatical ended, yet she delayed her return to Oxford. One twilight, she and Stefan climbed the monastery hill. Workers were stabilizing walls, sunlight gilding scaffolds. From the crypt entrance wafted a smell of damp parchment, mingled with wild thyme that had rooted in cracks. She surveyed the valley, remembering the first red crosses in the cookbook margin, the hush of bats, the flash of magnesium, the river sluicing past willow roots. The Middle Ages, she realized, were not a foreign country but a conversation, one that sometimes required tasting the words to hear them properly. Stefan idled beside her, hands in pockets. "So, Professor," he teased, "what shall we cook next?" She laughed, the sound echoing off stone. "Something that tells us where the rest of the tunnels lead. I have a feeling the monks were generous with their courses. Moonlight rose over hills furred with pine. Below, amid scaffolding and lamplight, the restored cloister courtyard took shape, a quiet square that centuries ago had hosted both psalm and soup. Eleanor felt the centuries compress into a single heartbeat. The cookbook lay in a vault now, but its spirit lingered, savory and luminous, guiding them onward. She inhaled night air tinged with resin and history, and answered Stefan's question with one of her own, playful yet earnest. "How do you feel about pudding?" The phrase floated into sky like rising dough, promising new coordinates, new meanings, new ways always of turning provision into life.